A single word shattered the peaceful family dinner. The royal guard's hand moved to his weapon as he stepped forward, his eyes locked on the 8-year-old princess. What happened next would expose a dark secret that had been hiding in plain sight for months, a truth so disturbing that it would shake the entire royal household to its core. The princess wasn't in danger from an outsider. The threat was sitting right at the dinner table, someone the family trusted completely. The guard had just seconds to act before it was too late. The morning of October 15th began like any other Tuesday at Buckingham Palace. The autumn sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors that generations of royals had walked upon. Leo stood in the East Gallery, reviewing the schedule for the upcoming state dinner with his private secretary, adjusting his navy suit jacket as he listened to the final preparations. Everything seemed perfectly normal, perfectly routine, perfectly safe. That was exactly the problem. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had been assigned to the Royal Protection Unit for 7 years, and in that time she'd learned to recognize when things were too perfect. She stood near the ornate doorway, her trained eyes constantly scanning the flow of palace staff moving through the corridors. Her partner, James Chen, stood across from her, both of them dressed in plain clothes that marked them as security rather than ceremonial guards. They communicated through subtle gestures and brief glances, a language developed over years of protecting the most famous family in the world. At precisely 9:47 in the morning, a member of Queen Consort Camilla's household staff, a man named Richard Pemberton, was walking toward the East Gallery carrying a silver tea service. Nothing unusual about that. Tea was served 100 times a day in the palace. But Richard's route was wrong. He should have been coming from the palace kitchens to the south, but instead he was approaching from the west wing, where Camilla's private offices were located. Sarah's eyes met James's across the room. He'd noticed it too. They'd both been briefed that morning about a potential security concern. Nothing concrete, just intelligence chatter picked up by MI5 about possible infiltration of palace staff. The briefing had been vague, almost dismissive, but both detectives knew that vague threats were often the most dangerous ones. Prince William was still absorbed in conversation, completely unaware of the approaching staff member, his younger son, Prince Louis, was scheduled to arrive at the palace within the hour for a private lunch. His first visit back from his boarding school's autumn break. William had been looking forward to it all week, and the joy was evident in his relaxed posture and occasional smile as he discussed the menu selections. Richard Pemberton moved closer, his polished shoes making soft clicking sounds on the marble. He was a man in his mid-40s, unremarkable in appearance, with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been part of Camilla's staff for 8 months, hired through the usual rigorous vetting process that all palace employees underwent. His references had been impeccable, his background check clean, his demeanor always professional and courteous. But Sarah had learned long ago that the most dangerous people were often the ones who seemed the most trustworthy. She watched as Richard adjusted his grip on the tea tray, and that's when she saw it. His left hand, the one not supporting the tray's weight, moved to his jacket pocket in a gesture that was too deliberate, too practiced. In security training, they called it a comfort check, the unconscious movement people made when they were carrying something they needed to confirm was still there, something important, something they planned to use. Sarah's hand moved slowly to the small radio piece in her ear, pressing it once to alert James without speaking. Across the room, James straightened slightly, his attention now fully focused on Richard Pemberton. They'd worked together long enough that words weren't necessary. They both knew something was wrong. Richard was now 15 feet from Prince William, close enough that Sarah could see the slight sheen of perspiration on his forehead. Despite the cool temperature maintained in the palace corridors, his breathing seemed slightly elevated, his eyes fixed on William with an intensity that didn't match the casual task of delivering tea. 10 feet. Sarah began moving, trying to maintain a casual pace that wouldn't alert Richard if her suspicions were wrong, but fast enough to intercept if they were right. 7 feet. Richard's hand went to his pocket again, and this time Sarah saw the outline of something small and rectangular. Not a weapon, she realized with growing alarm, but possibly a syringe or small vial. Poison delivered through a pinprick was an assassin's method, one that could be disguised as an accidental stumble or bump in a crowded palace corridor. 5 feet. Sarah made her decision. She gave the signal a specific gesture that meant immediate threat, not confirmed danger. It was a signal that required instant response from anyone trained to recognize it, and it was designed to alert protection officers, and, if necessary, the royal family members themselves. Prince William saw it. Years of security briefings and training meant he recognized Sarah's hand signal instantly, even though he'd hoped to never see it used in real life. His body responded before his mind fully processed what was happening, royal training overriding his shock. He turned toward the approaching staff member, his expression shifting from pleasant conversation to sharp assessment in a heartbeat. That's when everything exploded into motion. Richard Pemberton saw that he'd been made. The professional mask slipped from his face, replaced by something cold and determined. His hand dove into his pocket fully now, no longer attempting subtlety. William saw the movement and reacted on pure instinct, stepping forward to place himself between Richard and the corridor, where his security team was converging. But Richard wasn't moving toward William. At the last second, he pivoted, and William realized with horror that Richard's target wasn't him at all. The man was heading toward the private elevator that led to the family quarters, the same elevator that Prince Louis would be using when he arrived. Whatever Richard had planned, it was meant for William's son, not William himself. The realization hit William like a physical blow. His protective instincts, honed by years of fatherhood, completely overrode centuries of royal protocol about composure and dignity. He lunged forward, his hand reaching out to grab Richard's shoulder, his voice rising in a shout that echoed through the marble halls. "Don't touch him." The words weren't meant for Richard. They were meant for anyone, everyone, a father's desperate warning that his child was in danger. William's hand connected with Richard's jacket, pulling him backward with enough force to send the tea tray clattering to the floor. The sound of breaking china was deafening in the suddenly silent corridor. Sarah and James were on Richard in seconds. Professional and efficient. James caught Richard's arm, the one that had been reaching into his pocket, twisted it behind his back in a move practiced thousands of times. Sarah's hand closed around Richard's wrist, preventing him from accessing whatever was in that pocket, and she called out codes into her radio that would lock down the entire palace section. But William wasn't watching the takedown. His mind was racing ahead, calculating times and distances. Louis was due to arrive in 47 minutes. The private elevator led directly to the family quarters where children often played unsupervised by heavy security. If Richard had managed to tamper with something in that elevator, if he'd planted something there, if this was part of a larger plot, then Louis could still be in danger. William turned toward his private secretary, who stood frozen in shock at the sudden violence. "Get my son's security detail on the phone now. Tell them to change routes. He doesn't use the family elevator. Comes through the state entrance with full escort." His voice was commanding, every inch the future king who would one day rule. But his hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his own phone to call Catherine. More security personnel flooded into the corridor, their footsteps thundering on the marble as they responded to Sarah's alert. Palace protocol for a security breach was extensive and rehearsed regularly. Within 90 seconds, every entrance to the East Wing was sealed. Within 3 minutes, the entire palace was on lockdown, with armed officers taking positions at key points and security cameras being reviewed in real time. Richard Pemberton was on the floor now, his hands being secured with professional restraints, his face pressed against the cold marble. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice calm but firm as she read him his rights. James was already removing the contents of Richard's pockets, laying them out carefully on the floor, where they could be photographed and documented. What they found made William's blood run cold. A small glass vial containing a clear liquid, later identified as a powerful sedative that could render a child unconscious within seconds. A syringe, medical grade, with a retractable needle designed to pierce clothing. A key card for the private elevator system, one that shouldn't have existed outside of senior royal family members' possession. And perhaps most damning, a detailed schedule of Prince Louis's movements for the entire week. including his arrival time, preferred routes through the palace, and the times when he was typically alone or with minimal security. William stared at the items spread across the marble floor, his mind struggling to process the implications. This wasn't a random attack. This was planned, detailed, and sophisticated. Someone had provided Richard with information that should have been impossible to obtain. Someone inside the palace, someone trusted, had been feeding him intelligence about William's children. "Your Highness," Sarah said quietly, stepping away from the secured suspect to speak with William privately. "We need to get you to a secure location while we process this scene and determine if there are additional threats." But William shook his head, his eyes still fixed on that schedule, on his son's name written in neat handwriting beside times and locations. Who gave him that information? Who else is involved? "That's what we need to find out," Sarah replied. "But sir, protocol requires that we move you to safety first." "No." William's voice was steel. "Not until I know my children are safe. Not until I know every person who had any part in this is identified and contained." He looked up at Sarah, and she saw something in his eyes that reminded her why the monarchy had survived for 1,000 years. When it came to protecting their own, royals could be absolutely ruthless. The sound of rapid footsteps announced the arrival of more officials. Palace security chiefs, metropolitan police commanders, and representatives from MI5 all converged on the scene. But before any of them could speak, another figure appeared in the doorway. And the atmosphere in the corridor changed instantly. Queen Consort Camilla stood framed in the ornate doorway, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. Behind her stood two of her personal staff members, both looking equally disturbed by the commotion. Her eyes swept across the scene, taking in Richard Pemberton, restrained on the floor, the broken tea service, the security personnel, and finally landing on William. "What on earth is happening?" she demanded, her voice carrying the authority of her position. "William, someone said there was a security incident involving my staff." William turned to face his stepmother, and for a moment the two of them simply stared at each other. Years of complicated history, of public scrutiny and private tensions, of trying to blend two families into one after Diana's death, all of it seemed to hang in the air between them. Then William spoke, his voice carefully controlled, but with an edge that everyone in the corridor could hear. "One of your staff members just attempted to attack my son. He was carrying sedatives and detailed information about Louis's schedule. Information that should have been impossible for him to obtain without help from inside the palace." The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. Camilla's face went pale, and she took a step backward as if physically, struck by the accusation that hadn't quite been spoken aloud but was clearly implied. The silence in the East Gallery stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was actually only 5 seconds. Queen Consort Camilla's face had gone from pale to flushed, her hands clenching at her sides as she processed William's words and their terrible implication. Behind her, her two staff members exchanged worried glances, clearly unsure whether they should retreat or remain. "That's impossible," Camilla said finally, her voice shaking slightly. "William, I would never. My staff would never. How dare you suggest that I had anything to do with a plot against your children?" William's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, her voice professional and diplomatic. "Your Majesty, His Royal Highness isn't making accusations. However, the suspect was employed in your household, and he was in possession of highly classified security information. We need to determine how he obtained that information, which means investigating everyone who had access to it." Camilla turned her sharp gaze to the detective. "Are you suggesting that I'm under investigation? That my entire household is suspect?" "I'm suggesting that we follow protocol," Sarah replied calmly, "which requires us to question anyone who might have had contact with the suspect or access to the information he possessed, including household staff, security personnel, and administrative officials across all royal residences." The arrival of King Charles interrupted what was becoming an increasingly tense confrontation. The king moved quickly, despite his age, his face grave as he took in the scene before him. His private secretary followed close behind, already speaking urgently into a phone. Charles had been in a meeting with the Prime Minister when the security alert came through, and he'd left immediately. Protocol demanding that the monarch be informed and protected during any palace. Security breach. Someone explained what's happened, Charles commanded. His voice carrying the weight of authority that came with the crown. Detective Inspector Mitchell gave a concise briefing, laying out the facts without speculation or embellishment. She explained Richard Pemberton's actions, the items found in his possession, the signal she'd given, and Prince William's intervention. As she spoke, William watched his father's expression shift from concern to shock to barely contained fury. When Sarah finished, Charles turned to look at the man still restrained on the marble floor. Richard Pemberton had stopped struggling, but his eyes were alert and calculating, watching everyone in the corridor as if memorizing faces and reactions. "Has he said anything?" Charles asked. "Not yet, Your Majesty," James Chen reported. "He invoked his right to silence immediately upon arrest. But we found this on him as well." He held up a small mobile phone, the kind sold in convenience stores with prepaid minutes and no contract. A burner phone, untraceable and disposable. Charles's expression darkened further. That suggests premeditation and conspiracy. He looked at Richard directly, his voice cold as winter frost. "You will tell us who put you up to this? You will tell us who provided you with information about my grandson's schedule. And you will tell us what you intended to do with those sedatives." Richard smiled then. A small, chilling expression that made everyone in the corridor tense. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I've nothing to say without my solicitor present." The king looked like he wanted to say something harsh, something very unkingly, but years of training held him in check. He simply nodded once, sharply, and turned to the senior security chief who had just arrived. "Get him out of my sight. Take him to a secure facility and ensure he's under constant observation. I want every communication he's made in the past year analyzed. Every person he's met with, every place he's been, every penny he's spent. Find me answers." As security personnel lifted Richard from the floor and began escorting him out, the man turned his head to look directly at Camilla. The queen consort took an involuntary step backward, her face showing genuine fear at whatever she saw in his expression. It was a look of recognition, perhaps, or accusation, or warning. Whatever it was, it sent a chill through everyone who witnessed it. After Richard was gone, Charles turned to William, his expression softening slightly. "Are you all right? And Catherine and the children?" "Louis hasn't arrived yet," William said, his voice tight with residual adrenaline. His security detail diverted his route. He'll enter through the state entrance with full escort. Catherine is at home with Charlotte and George. I've ordered increased security at all our residences until we understand the full scope of this threat. Good. Charles nodded. That's good thinking. He paused, then added quietly, "You did the right thing, stopping him. I know it couldn't have been easy, breaking protocol like that." William let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "When I saw that schedule with Lewis's name on it, when I realized what this man intended, nothing else mattered. Not protocol, not dignity, not appearances. Just keeping my son safe." Charles placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a rare public display of affection between them. "That's what makes you a good father, and what will make you a good king. Knowing when the rules matter and when they don't." The moment was interrupted by Camilla's voice, still sharp with indignation and now mixed with something that might have been hurt. "Are we going to address the elephant in the room? Am I under suspicion here? Because I will not stand here and be treated like a criminal in my own home." Charles removed his hand from William's shoulder and turned to his wife. His expression conflicted. "Darling, no one is treating you like a criminal. But you must understand that we need to investigate your household. This man worked for you. He had access to areas of the palace that most staff don't. Need to know how he obtained classified information. Perhaps he obtained it from someone in William's household." Camilla shot back. "Or from general palace staff. Why is everyone immediately assuming it came from my people?" "Because he worked for you," William said bluntly. "Because he served tea in your private quarters. Because he had a key card to family areas that only senior household members should possess." The evidence points to your staff, Camilla, whether you want to accept that or not. Evidence, Camilla repeated, her voice rising. The only evidence is that a man I hired in good faith, passed every security check, who was vouched for by people I trust, turned out to be something other than what he claimed. That doesn't make me complicit. That makes me a victim of deception, just like all of you. Your Majesty, Sarah Mitchell interjected carefully, trying to diffuse the escalating argument. If I may, we've already begun reviewing Richard Pemberton's employment file, the referees who vouched for him, the background check companies used, the interview process. We're treating this as a potential infiltration operation, which means someone with knowledge of palace hiring procedures may have helped him get placed in your household specifically. Why my household? Camilla demanded. If someone wanted access to the children, wouldn't William's staff or Catherine's staff make more sense? Not necessarily, James Chen spoke up. Your household has less scrutiny precisely because you're not in the direct line of succession. Security around you is tight, but the monitoring of your staff's movements and access is less restrictive than it is around the future king and his children. For someone planning an infiltration, your household would be the logical choice because it provides access to the palace while attracting less attention. Camilla seemed to deflate slightly at this explanation, the defensive anger fading into worried realization. So someone used me? Used my household as a way to get to William's children. That's our working theory, Sarah confirmed. And if that's true, then you're as much a victim here as anyone. But we still need to investigate thoroughly, which will require full cooperation from you and your entire staff. Of course, Camilla said quietly. Whatever you need. She looked at William, and for a moment, the complicated history between them seemed to fade away, replaced by a shared understanding of the threat they all faced. I'm sorry, William. Truly, if someone in my household helped this man, if my trust was used as a weapon against your family, I am deeply, profoundly sorry. William studied her face, searching for deception or manipulation, but all he saw was genuine distress and concern. He nodded slowly. We'll find out who was involved. All of us together. Because if there's one conspirator in the palace, there might be more. The next several hours passed in a blur of interviews and investigations. Every member of Camilla's household staff was questioned, communications reviewed, their movements during the past weeks analyzed. The palace became a hub of law enforcement activity, with officers from multiple agencies working together to unravel the plot. Prince Louis arrived safely through the state entrance, surrounded by so many security personnel that he looked frightened until William rushed to embrace him. The boy had been told there was a security drill. Nothing to worry about. But he was smart enough to know that something serious had happened. William held his son tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, feeling the solid reality of him safe and unharmed. Meanwhile, forensic experts were analyzing every item found in Richard Pemberton's possession. The sedative was traced to a supplier in Eastern Europe, purchased through dark web channels using cryptocurrency. The phone contained encrypted messages that would take days to decode. But the keycard was perhaps the most troubling piece of evidence, because it had been programmed by someone with access to the palace's electronic security systems. By late afternoon, the investigation had produced its first major breakthrough. A junior member of Camilla's administrative staff, a woman named Helen Morris, had failed to appear for her scheduled interview. Her apartment was found empty, cleared out in a hurry, with signs that she'd left within hours of Richard's arrest. Her background, when MI5 agents dug deeper than the initial hiring checks, revealed connections to radical political groups who opposed the monarchy. William was in a secure conference room when he received this news, surrounded by security chiefs and investigators. Helen Morris had worked in Camilla's office for 18 months. She'd had access to schedules, communication systems, and most critically, the security office where keycards were programmed and maintained. She's in the wind, the MI5 director reported grimly. We have alerts at all ports and airports, but she had an 18-hour head start. If she's part of a larger organization, they'll have helped her disappear. What was her role exactly? William asked, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the anger building inside him. What access did she have? The director pulled up files on a secure tablet, showing William's documentation of Helen's duties and clearances. She processed correspondence for the Queen Consort's office. She maintained calendars and schedules for household staff. She coordinated with other royal households for events and visits. And, critically, she'd been trained on the palace electronic security systems as part of an efficiency initiative last year. She could program keycards, though every instance was supposed to be logged and supervised. Supposed to be, William repeated, but clearly wasn't always. We're reviewing all her access logs now, the director confirmed. But preliminary evidence suggests she programmed at least 3 unauthorized keycards in the past 6 months. Richard Pemberton had one. We don't know who has the other 2. The revelation that 2 more unauthorized keycards existed somewhere in the world sent shockwaves through the palace security apparatus. Within an hour, every electronic lock in Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and the other royal residences was being reprogrammed. It was a massive undertaking that would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds and take days to complete. But no one questioned the necessity. Until those cards were found, or the people holding them identified, every royal family member was potentially at risk. William stood in the palace control room, watching security feeds from dozens of cameras as technicians worked to upgrade the systems. His phone buzzed constantly with updates, messages from Catherine checking on his safety, texts from palace officials reporting new findings, emails from his private secretary trying to manage the fallout. The media hadn't gotten hold of the story yet, but it was only a matter of time. A major security incident at Buckingham Palace couldn't be hidden for long, especially with MI5 agents openly investigating throughout the building. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell appeared beside him, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd been working non-stop for 8 hours. Your Highness, we've made progress on Richard Pemberton's interrogation. He's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. William turned sharply. He's talking. What's he saying? Sarah gestured to a secure conference room off the control center. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private. Once inside the soundproof room, Sarah pulled out her tablet and brought up interview notes. Pemberton claims he was recruited 18 months ago by an organization that he refers to only as the Reform, according to him. They're a group of wealthy individuals who believe the monarchy needs to be dismantled and replaced with a modern republic. They've been planning a series of attacks designed to undermine public confidence in the royal family's ability to protect themselves and, by extension, their ability to lead the nation. Attacks. William repeated, his stomach sinking. Plural. How many? Pemberton claims today was supposed to be the first of 3 coordinated incidents. He won't give details about the other 2 yet. Says he's negotiating for immunity, but he's confirmed that there are other operatives in place. Some within palace staff, some outside who were planning to exploit the chaos. His attack would have caused. William felt cold despite the warm temperature in the room. What was his specific mission? What was he supposed to do to Louis? Sarah's expression showed a reluctance to share the details, but she continued. He was instructed to inject your son with the sedative during what would appear to be an accidental encounter in the private elevator. Once Louis was unconscious, Pemberton would trigger the emergency stop on the elevator and call for help, claiming the prince had suddenly collapsed. The sedative was designed to cause symptoms mimicking a serious medical emergency, possibly even cardiac arrest in a child. By the time doctors determined it was drug-induced rather than a natural crisis, the damage to the monarchy's image would be done. A young prince nearly dying inside Buckingham Palace, where he should have been completely safe, would generate massive media attention and public questions about whether the royals could protect their own children. William's hands clenched into fists. They wanted to kill my son to make a political point. Pemberton insists the sedative wouldn't have been fatal, that Louis would have recovered fully. But he admits the organization didn't particularly care either way. The goal was the spectacle, the undermining of confidence. If Louis had died, so much the better for their cause. William stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the palace gardens. Outside, tourists walked along the perimeter fence, taking photos and chatting happily, completely unaware of the crisis unfolding inside. He wanted to scream, to punch something, to find every member of this reform organization and make them pay for threatening his child. But he was the future king, and future kings didn't lose control, even when their every instinct demanded it. "What about Helen Morris?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Has Pemberton confirmed her involvement?" "Yes. According to him, she was his primary contact inside the palace. She provided the schedules, the keycard, and intelligence about security protocols. She also supposedly helped recruit at least 2 other staff members, though Pemberton claims he never met them directly. Everything was compartmentalized for security purposes. Each operative only knew their own mission and their immediate handler. Military tactics, William observed. These people are organized and funded. This isn't some fringe group operating out of a basement. Miwu agrees. They're treating this as domestic terrorism with possible international connections. The director of security joined them in the conference room, his face grim. "We've identified suspicious financial transactions in Helen Morris's accounts, going back over a year. Large deposits from offshore accounts, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting. She's been paid at least £200,000 over 18 months. That's serious money," William said. "Who has that kind of funding and that much hatred for the monarchy? That's what we're trying to determine. The financial trail is deliberately obscured, but our analysts are working with international partners to trace the money. What we do know is that the reform is more than just anti-monarchy activists. They have sophisticated planning capabilities, recruitment networks, and significant resources. This is a genuine threat, not just to your family, but potentially to the entire institution." A knock on the door interrupted them. King Charles entered, his face showing the strain of the day's events. Behind him came Camilla, and William noticed that she looked like she'd been crying. Whatever animosity had existed between them earlier seemed to have faded, replaced by shared concern and exhaustion. "They've found something else," Charles said, without preamble. "Another member of Camilla's household has been detained for questioning. Sebastian Wright, one of her senior advisors. He's been with us for 3 years. Highly trusted, excellent record. But when security reviewed his communications, they found encrypted messages on his personal computer. He's being interrogated now." Camilla sank into a chair, looking defeated. 3 years I've known Sebastian. 3 years of trusting him, relying on him for advice on everything from charitable work to daily schedules. How could I not have seen something?" "Because they're professionals," Sarah said gently. "These people are trained to blend in, to gain trust, to show you exactly what you want to see." "You couldn't have known." "But I should have," Camilla insisted. "William was right earlier. They used me, used my household, to get access because I'm not watched as carefully. I'm not as important, so the security around me isn't as tight, and that made me the weak point they could exploit." "You're not a weak point," Charles said firmly, moving to stand beside his wife's chair. "You're a victim of a sophisticated conspiracy. We all are." He looked at William. Sebastian Wright handled coordination between households for family events. He would have known Louis's schedule, known the security procedures, known everything these people needed to plan their attack. The door opened again, and James Chen entered with an urgent expression. "Your Majesty's Highness, we have a situation." Sebastian Wright has started talking, and what he's saying changes everything. He's claiming there's an attack planned for tonight during the state dinner with the visiting diplomats. The state dinner. William's mind raced through the implications. Over 200 guests, including foreign dignitaries, government officials, and members of the royal family, all gathering in the palace ballroom in just 4 hours. If someone wanted to make a spectacular statement against the monarchy, it would be the perfect target. "What kind of attack?" Charles demanded. Wright isn't giving specifics, claims he's not fully informed about the operational details. But he says Helen Morris mentioned something about making them all see the truth during the dinner. He thinks it might be some kind of public demonstration or exposure meant to humiliate the royal family in front of international guests. "Or it could be another cover story," William said, his security training kicking in. "They make us think it's going to be an embarrassment, so we lower our guard against a more serious threat. What if they're planning something violent?" The director of security was already on his phone, issuing rapid orders. "We need to consider canceling the dinner." "Absolutely not," Charles said immediately. "If we cancel, we show weakness." We tell these terrorists that they can disrupt our lives with mere threats. The dinner proceeds, but with enhanced security measures. Father William interjected, "With respect, this isn't about appearances. If there's a genuine threat to the guests, to our family, we have a responsibility to protect them." "And we will protect them," Charles responded. "But we'll do it while showing the world that the British monarchy doesn't bow to threats. We've survived far worse than this over 1,000 years. We'll survive this too." The next 4 hours were a masterclass in crisis management. Every guest on the invitation list was quietly revetted by MI5. Every staff member assigned to work. The dinner was interviewed again and their backgrounds checked thoroughly. Bomb-sniffing dogs swept the ballroom 3 times. Armed plainclothes officers were positioned throughout the palace, ready to respond to any threat. Additional security cameras were installed, and facial recognition software was set up to scan every person entering the building. William watched the preparations from the security control room, his dress uniform hanging ready for when he'd need to change and play his public role. Catherine had arrived with their security detail, insisting on being present despite William's concerns. She stood beside him now, her hand in his, both of them watching screens that showed guests beginning to arrive. "Are you sure about this?" Catherine asked quietly. "We could still cancel. Charles would listen to you if you pushed hard enough." William shook his head. "He's right. If we cancel, we give these people exactly what they want. They want us afraid, want us hiding, want the world to see that we can't even keep ourselves safe. We can't give them that victory, even if it puts everyone at risk. The risk is already there whether we proceed with the dinner or not. At least this way, we're prepared. We know there's a threat. We've identified some of the conspirators. And we have every security resource in the country focused on this building tonight." He squeezed her hand. "I won't let anything happen to you or our children. I promise." "The children aren't here," Catherine reminded him. "They're safely at home with enough security to guard a small nation. It's you I'm worried about. You have to be in that ballroom, shaking hands with hundreds of people, any one of whom could be part of this reform organization." William turned to look at his wife, seeing the fear in her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide. "I know you're scared. I am too. But this is what we signed up for when we chose this life. We face the threats, we do our duty, and we trust that the people protecting us are good at their jobs." Sarah Mitchell approached them, now dressed in elegant evening wear that disguised her role as protection officer. "Your Highnesses, the guests are arriving. You should prepare to make your entrance." As William changed into his formal attire, adjusting his medals and checking his appearance in the mirror, he thought about his children safe at home. He thought about the plot that had been meant to harm Louis, about the conspirators still at large, about the 2 missing keycards that could be anywhere. He thought about the dinner about to begin, with all its unknown dangers and hidden threats, and he thought about how he'd lunged at Richard Pemberton without hesitation, breaking every rule of royal behavior because protecting his family mattered more than protocol. Tonight, he'd have to trust others to do the protecting while he played his role as prince and future king. It was perhaps the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. The ballroom of Buckingham Palace gleamed under the light of 3 massive chandeliers, each containing hundreds of crystals that cast rainbow patterns across the walls. 200 guests in formal evening wear mingled beneath priceless artwork and beside arrangements of white roses that filled the air with their subtle fragrance. An orchestra played softly in the corner, providing elegant background music to conversations about trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic relations to anyone watching. It appeared to be a perfectly normal state dinner, one of dozens hosted at the palace each year. But William could feel the tension underlying every smile, every handshake, every polite laugh at diplomatic jokes. Armed security officers stood at discreet intervals, their evening wear, unable to completely disguise the alertness in their postures. Plainclothes protection officers circulated among the guests, their trained eyes constantly scanning for threats. William stood beside Catherine, greeting a delegation from Japan with practiced charm, discussing their recent visit to Kew Gardens and expressing interest in expanding cultural programs between their nations. His face showed pleasant engagement, but his peripheral vision tracked every movement in the ballroom. Every server carrying champagne, every guest moving toward his family members. King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla held court near the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by senior diplomats and government officials. Camilla appeared composed. Her earlier distress hidden behind the professional mask she'd learned to wear during years of public scrutiny, but William noticed how she stayed close to Charles. Our hand occasionally reached for his arm as if seeking reassurance. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell, transformed into what appeared to be a diplomatic aide, approached William with a champagne flute in hand, using it as cover to brief him quietly. Wright is still talking. He's given us 3 names of other staff members involved with the reform. All of them have been quietly detained and removed from the palace, but he insists that the main event tonight isn't about violence, it's about exposure. He keeps saying they want to reveal the truth to the world. What truth? William asked, maintaining his smile while waving to a minister across the room. He won't say specifically, just that it will destroy the monarchy's credibility and force Parliament to act. Sarah's eyes swept the ballroom. We've swept for recording devices, checked every camera, monitored all communications. If they're planning to expose something, we haven't found how they intend to do it. The first course of dinner was served, and guests began moving toward their assigned seats at the long tables arranged throughout the ballroom. William escorted Catherine to their positions near the head table, his mind still racing through possibilities. What could the reform possibly reveal that would damage the monarchy? Scandals had come and gone over the years, controversies weathered, secrets exposed. The institution had survived them all. As the dinner progressed through courses of Scottish salmon, Welsh lamb, and an array of British desserts, William found himself studying the faces around him. Diplomats he'd met dozens of times, government officials he'd known for years. Journalists from major international outlets granted special access to cover the event. Any one of them could be involved. Any one of them could be waiting for the right moment to launch whatever the reform had planned. The king rose to give his traditional speech welcoming the international guests and speaking about the importance of diplomatic relationships in an interconnected world. Charles's voice was strong and confident, showing no hint of the crisis that had consumed the palace all day. It was a masterful performance, one that reminded William of why his father, despite all the controversies and criticisms over the years, had been trained for this role since birth. As Charles concluded his remarks and guests applauded politely, William noticed something odd. One of the palace photographers, a man named David Fuller who'd been documenting royal events for over a decade, was adjusting his camera with unusual intensity. His hands moved too quickly, too nervously, and he kept glancing toward the main entrance as if waiting for something. William caught Sarah's eye across the room and made a subtle gesture toward the photographer. She acknowledged with a barely perceptible nod and began moving in that direction. Her movements casual and unhurried so as not to alert anyone watching. But before Sarah could reach him, the ballroom doors burst open with a crash that echoed through the suddenly silent room. 6 people stormed in, their faces covered with masks bearing the image of a broken crown. They wore matching black clothing with the words "The Reform" printed in red letters across their chests. And they were armed not with guns or weapons, but with large tablets displaying video footage. Freeze. Armed officers appeared from multiple positions, weapons drawn and aimed at the intruders. Nobody move. The masked figures stopped, but didn't retreat. One of them, a woman based on her voice, spoke loudly enough for everyone in the ballroom to hear. We're not here to hurt anyone. We're here to show the truth, to show what the monarchy has been hiding, to prove they're not fit to rule because they can't even protect their own family. She held up her tablet, and on its screen was security footage from that morning. Footage showing Richard Pemberton walking through palace corridors with the tea service. Footage showing him reaching into his pocket. And then, most damning of all, footage showing Prince William physically attacking him, shouting and throwing him to the ground in what appeared to be an unprovoked assault. The video had been edited, the context removed. It showed William's actions, but not what had prompted them. To anyone seeing it without the full story, it looked like a violent prince attacking an innocent staff member, potentially because of some personal grievance or uncontrolled rage. This is Prince William assaulting a man who worked in Queen Consort Camilla's household. The woman continued, her voice carrying clearly in the shocked silence. "This happened this morning, and the palace has been covering it up all day. This is the future king, showing his true nature, his violence and instability. This is who they want to put on the throne. Someone who attacks servants, someone who can't control himself, someone who represents everything wrong with inherited power." William felt the blood drain from his face. This was the exposure Wright had warned about. Not revealing any deep secret, but taking the truth and twisting it, presenting his protective action as unprovoked violence. And they'd timed it perfectly, during a state dinner with international media present, ensuring the footage would spread around the world within minutes. "That's not what happened," William said, his voice cutting through the ballroom's stunned silence. He stepped forward, ignoring Sarah's warning gesture to stay back. "That man was attempting to harm my son. He had sedatives and detailed information about my child's schedule. I stopped him from carrying out an attack. I protected my family." "Convenient story," the woman replied. "Where's your proof?" "All we have is this video showing you assaulting an innocent man. The proof is in custody being interrogated by MI5. Charles's voice rang out authoritatively. "That man has confessed to being part of a conspiracy to harm the royal family. He admitted to planning to drug my grandson. His accomplice fled the country this morning after we discovered her involvement. These people," he gestured at the masked intruders, "are part of that same conspiracy, attempting to use twisted versions of events to undermine the monarchy." Detective Inspector Mitchell and her team were already moving in on the intruders, but the woman held up her hand. "We're not resisting arrest. We've already accomplished our mission. This footage has been live streaming to thousands of viewers since we entered this room. The world is watching right now. They've seen the future king's violence, and they'll demand answers." She was right. William could already see guests pulling out phones, checking news sites and social media. Within seconds, the edited video was everywhere, trending on every platform, being shared and reshared with commentary from people who had no context, no understanding of what had really happened. The conspiracy's plan wasn't to physically harm anyone at the dinner. It was to weaponize the truth, to use William's own protective actions against him. As palace security arrested the intruders and MI5 agents rushed to secure the scene, William looked around at the ballroom full of shocked diplomats and journalists. The evening was ruined. The international incident, exactly what the reform had wanted. But more than that, his reputation was being destroyed in real time, his actions being reframed as violence and instability rather than protection and courage. Catherine appeared at his side, taking his hand firmly. "We tell the whole story," she said quietly, but with steel in her voice. "We show them everything. The sedatives, the schedule, the threat to Louis. We don't let them control the narrative." Over the next hour, as the state dinner dissolved into chaos, and guests were politely but firmly escorted from the palace, an emergency response team assembled in the control room. Public relations experts, legal advisors, security officials, and senior royals all gathered to manage the crisis. The edited video had been viewed over 5 million times in the first hour. News outlets around the world were running with the story, most presenting it as a shocking display of royal violence. Some questioning whether William was fit to be future king. Hashtags like #ViolentPrince and #AbolishTheMonarchy were trending globally. "We need to release the full security footage," William's private secretary argued. "Show exactly what happened, the threat to Louis," William's justified response. But legal advisors warned against it. Releasing security footage could compromise ongoing investigations, reveal palace security procedures, and potentially violate privacy laws regarding a minor, since Louis was mentioned in the footage. The debate raged for 30 minutes before King Charles made the executive decision. "We release a statement with as many facts as we can legally share. We confirm the attack was attempted, that a suspect is in custody and has confessed, that other conspirators have been arrested, and that Prince William's actions were in direct response to an imminent threat against his child. We don't release the full footage. But we authorize Detective Inspector Mitchell to give an interview to a trusted journalist, providing her professional assessment of the incident." It was a compromise, and like all compromises, it satisfied no one completely. but it was the best they could do while balancing transparency with security concerns and legal constraints. Sarah Mitchell's interview aired 2 hours later on the BBC. She spoke calmly and professionally, describing the security breach. Richard Pemberton's actions and possessions, the threat to Prince Louis, and the split-second decision William had made to physically intervene. She explained the signal she'd given, confirming that William had acted on valid security information from a protection officer, not on impulse or anger. "He saw the same things I saw," Sarah told the interviewer. The suspicious approach, the reaching for something in a pocket, the movement toward the area where his son would be. And he reacted to protect his child. Any parent would have done the same. The fact that he's a prince doesn't make him less of a father or less entitled to defend his family from a credible threat. The interview helped, but it didn't stop the controversy. The reform organization had successfully planted doubt in millions of minds, successfully framed William's protective action as potentially inappropriate violence. Even people who believed the threat was real questioned whether William de Netza should have personally intervened rather than letting security handle it. 3 days after the state dinner disaster, Richard Pemberton and Sebastian Wright both pled guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for providing information about the reform organization. Their testimony led to arrests across the UK and in 3 other countries, dismantling a network that had been planning attacks not just on the British monarchy, but on royal families across Europe. Helen Morris was found in Portugal 2 weeks later, attempting to board a flight to South America. She was extradited back to Britain and charged with conspiracy, treason, and multiple counts of providing material support to terrorism. The 2 missing keycards were recovered from suspects arrested in London and Edinburgh, both of whom had been planning to use them to access royal residences during future public events. 1 month after the incident, William stood before members of Parliament, giving testimony about the attack and the security failures that had allowed it to progress as far as it did. He answered questions for over 3 hours, maintaining his composure even when opposition MPs suggested he'd overreacted or acted inappropriately. When asked directly if he regretted his actions that morning, William's answer was simple and unwavering. "No. My son was in danger, and I acted to protect him. I would do the same thing again tomorrow, without hesitation. Being a prince doesn't mean I surrender my rights or responsibilities as a father. If that makes me violent or unstable in some people's eyes, I can live with that judgment. What I couldn't live with is failing to protect my child when I had the chance to act." The response became headline news, with public opinion slowly shifting as more details about the conspiracy emerged. Polls showed that while some still questioned William's judgment, the majority of Britons supported his actions and agreed that a parent's protective instincts should outweigh royal protocol. Camilla gave a televised interview addressing her household's infiltration by conspirators, apologizing to William and Catherine directly for the fact that people working for her had been used to threaten their family. The genuine emotion in her words, the obvious guilt and distress, helped heal some of the rift that had opened between different wings of the royal family. 6 months later, at a special ceremony honoring the security personnel who had prevented the attack from succeeding, William stood beside Sarah Mitchell and James Chen as they received commendations for exceptional service. In his speech, William spoke about the importance of vigilance, of trusting, trained professionals, and of the courage it took to give a warning signal that could have been wrong, but turned out to be devastatingly right. He also spoke about fatherhood, about the impossible balance of public duty and private love, about the moment when those 2 forces collided in a palace corridor and forced him to choose between protocol and protection. "I'm often asked about that day," William said to the assembled crowd of security professionals and government officials. "People want to know if I regret breaking protocol, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I think about how it looked to the world. And my answer is always the same. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about protocol or appearances or how history would judge me. I was thinking about my son, about keeping him safe, about stopping a threat before it could harm him. That's not violence. That's love. And I'll never apologize for loving my children enough to protect them by any means necessary." The audience erupted in applause, and William saw Catherine in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she clapped along with everyone else. Beside her sat Prince Louis, now old enough to understand at least some of what had happened. Looking at his father with an expression of pride and admiration, that evening, after the ceremony concluded and the family returned home to Kensington Palace, Louis asked William about that morning in the corridor. He'd heard stories, seen news coverage, listened to adults discussing it when they thought he wasn't paying attention. William knelt down to his son's level, looking into eyes that held both curiosity and lingering fear. "Someone wanted to hurt you," he said honestly. "They had a plan, and they almost succeeded. But brave people stopped them, people like Sarah and James who saw the danger and warned us. And when I realized you were in danger, I did what any father would do. I stepped in to protect you." "Were you scared?" Louis asked. "Terrified," William admitted. "More scared than I've ever been in my life. Because it wasn't about me, it was about you. And the thought of anything happening to you, of not being there to keep you safe, that's the most frightening thing I can imagine." Louis processed this for a moment, then threw his arms around William's neck. "Thank you for protecting me, Daddy." William held his son close, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the warmth of his small body, grateful beyond words that this moment was possible. "Always," he whispered, "no matter what it costs, no matter what anyone says or thinks, I will always protect you." That's what parents do. Later, after Louis was asleep and the house had grown quiet, William stood at his study window looking out over London. Somewhere in the city, conspirators sat in prison cells, paying the price for their plot against his family. Somewhere, the reform organization was likely regrouping, planning new approaches, recruiting new members to their cause. But tonight, his family was safe. His children slept peacefully in their beds, guarded by professionals who had proven their competence and courage. And William had learned something valuable about himself. About the limits of protocol and the strength of love. About the moment when a prince had to become simply a father willing to do whatever it took to protect his child. "Don't touch him." Those 3 words, shouted in a moment of desperate fear, had become a defining moment of his life. They'd been used against him, twisted by enemies, questioned by critics. But they'd also been honest and true, the raw expression of a father's love stripped of all royal pretense. And William wouldn't change them for anything in the world.